Imagine being born into a family of slaves and not being permitted to become or even learn anything. This is the story of how Nero, a slave, became the strongest in the kingdom and married the princess. Two slaves were sent to get wood. As they were late, they decided to take a route that was once a battlefield. It wasn't that long since it happened. A small village got caught up in the battle, and this place became a corpse field. As they were going, they heard a baby crying. They stopped to see that his father had died while he was carrying the baby. They tried to ignore it and leave, but it was too much for the women. The husband warned her that he would have to live as a slave, but she promised that he will be okay, and she will be taking care of him. His father decided that it's time for him to learn about books and weapons, even though slaves were not allowed to. He took him to the basement and showed him their great-grandfather's book collection. When the world starts to change, Nero should be ready. Few years later, his father died as he was working in the garden. His younger siblings came rushing to him so that he could help, but it was too late. They buried their father under a tree and were crying when a man came saying that he should have taken his medicine. Nero's mother screams at the man to leave because he was the cause of her husband's death. The man swings his fist at her, calling her a bitch. He stops when she tells him that she is the property of the Riga's family, and he decides to stop and leave. But he tells her that he will buy her from her owner very soon. Few days later, as Sarah was working, she gets called by her master. He tells her that the man from before was now her new master. Nero and his two little sisters see their mother being taken by the man. She told Nero never to cry in front of his two little sisters, so he didn't shed a tear. The next day, Nero was running and he saw his mother's corpse. His two sisters also came after him, and he tried to hide the horrible scene from them. He then hears the guy screaming that he doesn't want to go to jail because she was a slave, and she was the same as a horse. That night, when his two sisters went to sleep, Nero started to carve himself a wooden sword. He decided to avenge his father and mother and train to become stronger.
He started to train every single day from that moment on. 1 year later, the emperor of the Mu Empire comes to the Riga's family. The Riga's family head came out to greet him.
He asks if the boy that was standing with him was the son of Kundun, one of the empire's greatest heroes and his best friend that has died. And he says yes, and his name was Evan. Evan invited him over to their house so that he can give him a tour. Evan started to show him around the house and also show him that he is able to manipulate magic at such an age. Suddenly, a herd of bulls came running at them. The guards tried to stop them, but nothing was working against them. The emperor told Evan to leave as he started to take out his sword. Then out of nowhere, Nero steps between them. He started to use a technique, and the bulls stopped. The emperor was impressed at how Nero stopped all of them at once. Nero was told by his father that he was a half-elf and that he was adopted when he was young. The emperor asked him if he was a half-elf and was able to communicate with animals. Suddenly, the bulls went out of control and started attacking again. As Nero got a sword, he swung at his neck and killed him in a single blow. The king asked him again if he used magic or if he is able to communicate with animals, but he denied it because he worked at the farm and they were familiar with him. The king tells him to choose his reward, and he says that he wants to join the Exchanum Academy. Even tells the king that Nero is a slave and that he can't be allowed to join the academy. The king tells him that he knew Nero was a half-elf and that he communicated with the animals to stop them, but he also communicated with them to attack him too. He tells his guards to send Nero a Kali mines so that he works in labor for his entire life. That night, Nero and several other people were taken to work in the mines. The same night, a man with yellow hair came to their house so that he could buy Nero's two sisters. He was a pedophile that liked children. He offered to buy them for 300 gold. Their master told the man that heard some rumors about him of what he does to small children. He offered him 600 golden coins. Nero was crying as he was being taken. He didn't want to leave his two sisters behind. He was suddenly hit in the face by a whip. The guards started to hit the little boy as he begged. Nero hears a scream. They turn to see that it's a wolf eating somebody. The guard shoots some arrows and he hits his target. The wolf runs away after. They kept going even though it was dangerous. After a couple of hours they reached the mines. They were immediately told to start working, even though they were tired. They were told that they will only live to mine from now on, and if they don't comply, they would simply be killed. After a week of constant working, they started to fall one after another. They were immediately disposed off if they couldn't continue. That's when the guard heard something. He tells them to go get swords, but they would be breaking the law if they do. Their warden had then come flying out of nowhere. It's a monster, and a huge one at that. Suddenly, a huge axe was thrown at the guard and he died. The warden runs to them and asks if they didn't know how to use a sword. But what can they do? Slaves weren't permitted to know how to use swords in the first place. The monster was about to kill the warden when Nero came from above and cut at his hand in one swing. The monster turned his focus to Nero and attacked him. Back to Regis and the yellow-haired man who wanted to buy the Nero sisters. He tells Regis that he will still be available if he changes his mind. Even though he refused to sell the two sisters, Nero has killed the monster single-handedly. The warden was astonished with his skills. He decided to make Nero one of the guards in the mine. The next day, Nero was given some fresh new clothes and a brand new sword. The warden called for Samuel. Samuel is an elite Dark Knight. He is ordered to train Nero every day when he is on duty. The other guards watched how Nero trained every day and was amazed by how fast he was learning. Samuel not only kept a close eye on Nero's skills in swordsmanship, but also his physical strength. One day, as Nero was working, a group of guys approached him. They were jealous of Nero's position as a guard, and they threatened to kill him if he didn't stop smiling. They left after being scolded by a guard. Nero was feeling down after that. An old man told him not to listen to them because they are just jealous. The emergency siren then sounded. Nero wore his clothes and went out for battle. He saw the warden when he went outside. He was down on his knees in front of the monsters. He was beheaded by the monster. Nero froze at that sight. Samuel stepped in and told Nero to run away because he wasn't ready yet. Samuel started to attack the monsters and he killed a lot of them. He was stabbed by the leader and was killed. Nero was scared to death and he ran away back into the mines. He stopped when he saw that the rest of the slaves have thrown their swords. He asked them what they were doing, and they were planning to become slaves to the monsters. The leader of the monsters came and told them that they didn't need slaves, but they were in need of some food. Nero took out his sword and started to attack his underlings. But after some time, he was caught by their leader and stabbed in the stomach. The monsters tell him that he is better than those other losers, but since young meat was better, he will be eating him. He was then struck by a wave of fire that suddenly killed him. It was the king. Nero was on his last breath. The king thanked him for what he had done, but Nero was nearly dead. He asked him to grant him a favor by protecting his two sisters. But the king refused because he was gonna save him. The other slaves came forward and tried to claim that they were the ones who fought off the monsters shamelessly. The king knew it was Nero who saved his people and not this trash, so he killed them for lying to him. The king ordered his knights to take care of Nero until he makes a full recovery and to send him to the Exchanum Academy that he dreamed of attending. After recovering, Nero was sent home to say goodbye to his sisters before he left. He gives them a hug and promises them that he will come back for them and they will no longer be slaves or poor. He leaves and goes to the cart that he will go with. He was told to sit in the luggage cart by the driver. He was then stopped by one of the guards. He held his sword to the driver's neck and told him to treat Nero well, otherwise not only him, but his entire family too will be wiped out. He gave Nero some blankets and then they departed. Nero was given a new sword by the king when he was being treated. It used to belong to the warden, but now that he is dead, it belongs to no one. And Nero took it. What life is ahead of him? And how far will he reach? The sun rises the next morning. The driver tells Nero to get up because they reached the academy. After a whole night of traveling, they have finally reached it. They go to the entrance and tell them their family name so that they can enter. The guard greets them and welcomes them as Evan is the son of Kundin, the great mage. Evan's butler was about to tell him about how Nero will be his slave, but the guard stops him before he talks and tells him that he, Nero, will be the adoptive son of the Rigas family, meaning that they will be brothers and Nero will be a student. This was a really strange situation between the two. Nero was told by Evan not to follow him. He tells him to not call him master anymore and to never come close to him. The new students all gather into the school hall. She gives a speech about the descendants of the heroes and noble students that also were attending. They all start to cheer for her. Nero, on the other hand, was feeling left out. The other kids kept holding their noses whenever he gets close to them. They were sent outside to get divided into groups. They were told that after being divided, they will be going through an entrance exam next month, and if they fail, they will be sent back home. Two boys were talking about how they wanted to be in the group with the princess when someone walked up to them and slapped them both. It was Princess Tirasu. She heard what they said, and she warned them about saying stuff like that about them. The professor yelled at her to stop or else should be sent home. She left as the two boys started to cry. Nero was amazed, and he thought that she was cool. The professor told them that the leader is going to be Evan, as he grouped him with Nero, Neria, Jackin, and Haken. Nero noticed that Neria was also a slave, and not from a noble family. Jackin and Haken were happy that they were in the same group as Evan, even though they got slapped. But Evan was really mad because he was in the same group as them. They were then sent to where they will be living together from now on. They started to treat Nero and Neria like trash from the moment they all stepped into the room. They made them do their laundry. Neria tried to help Nero, but he pushed her away, saying that he doesn't need her help. Evan ordered Nero to get him, and he did. But he also forced Nero and Neria to give their share of food to Haken and Jackin. The next day, it was their first lesson, and they were ordered to spar with each other. Haken and Jackin decided to go against Nero and Neria. The professor tells them to surrender if they feel danger, and tells them to begin. Everyone began, and it was all a chaos. Jackin approached Nero and told him not to worry, and he started to swing his sword at him. Nero went through him really fast and broke his sword to pieces. Jackin calls out for the professor and tells him that his sword is old. The professor tells him that he has checked beforehand, and he gave him another one. Jackin rushed at Nero once more, but Nero did the same thing, and he broke his sword in half in one swing. The professor and the other students were shocked. Jackin starts to make excuses about how the sword is old, but the teacher comes to him and tells him to shut up. It was because Nero was stronger than him and was strong enough to break the sword. Nero forces Jackin to surrender as falls onto the ground. The teachers tell them that the winners will go to the right and the losers to the left. The other kids started to make remarks about Nero as he moved to the right. He couldn't care less about their remarks as he was busy enjoying his wooden sword and the experience he gained from working at the mines. Soon after, someone else came to the right too, and it was Princess Tirasu. Nero tells her that she was really strong as he was watching her spar, but she tells him that the other kids were just weaker. She asks him why he is talking to her formally, and he tells her that he is a slave. She asks him why it matters, and Nero is speechless. She tells him that she doesn't care that he is a slave, and to stop talking to her formally. Do the elves not have any slaves? He thought. After a bit of time, Evan came, and he said that he expected nothing less from Tirasu. He tried to make small talk with her, but she was giving him no care. He tries to flirt with her, but she just tells him that she doesn't have time for him now, and to shut up. He then invited her over for a cup of tea and moved away. He stood next to Nero, and he told him to be careful, as he had messed with a noble. Later that night, Neria came back home. Her face was all bruised up, and she was crying. It is all the fault of that bastard called Haken. She didn't even know how to swing a sword, but he kept hitting her. Evan and his group of friends come into the room. He calls over Nero, and he comes running to him. He tells him that he has forgotten his place and orders him to become a horse. Nero was shocked, but Evan ordered him not to ask questions and to simply do it. Nero went down to the ground. Jackin went to him so that he could use him as a horse. The other kid also called for Neria. He screamed at her to come to him. The dumb brat then used her as a horse too. Nero saw her crying, and he felt pity for her. Evan and his friends went outside to cool off. After a while, Neria started to cry as her knees were now bruised up. She hated how they treated her, and Nero told her to stop crying. He stood up to show that his knees were bleeding. He looked at her and smiled. He told her to smile and the pain would then stop. He said that they will also get a chance one day. That night, as Evan was sleeping, Nero stood over him with the sword he was given by the emperor. This was the easiest way to rid himself of Evan. He stopped for a moment and started to think about the consequences of his actions and what will happen to his sisters after he was punished. He decided to put the sword back and go to bed. Neria told him that he made the right decision. The next morning, they were learning about magic. A student steps up and tells the teacher that he never used magic before. The professor tells him to imagine something rotating on his palm and to scream Anacrosha. He did as the teacher said, and he began emitting fire from his palm as the teacher told him to not stop. The rest of the students were also doing the same thing. Evan amazed all of his classmates when he used a huge spell called Bloom into Flames. The teacher was impressed and told the class not to be discouraged because they will all be able to do the same thing. He got closer to Evan and he whispered to him that he knows that they hired a private tutor illegally to teach him at the age of 14 and to stop discouraging his fellow classmates. Nero tried it and he also casted a huge spell. Everyone was amazed because they didn't expect a slave to be able to do it. His spell then faded away. He tried it once more, and this time, he made a small spell. Everyone started to laugh at him. Neria also succeeded in making a spell. The teacher then took them to train with dummies. They only needed to shoot a fire arrow and hit the dummy straight in the head. This is the basics of the magic that they will be learning. The ones that hit the dummy can go home, while the others will not be able to leave. They began shooting at the dummies with fire arrows. Nero tried to shoot a fire arrow, but it turned to dust before it could even get close to the dummy. Neria kept motivating him and telling him that eventually he would succeed. Nero then felt an extremely painful sensation in his toes, and it turns out that Haken threw a fire arrow at his feet. The teacher extinguished it and told them to be careful. Sadly, they were the only shoes that he had, and they were made by his mom. Most of the students succeeded and Nero was left to be the only one. Atlas struck the dummy and was finally able to go home. The teacher stopped him and told him to stop holding back because he wasn't deceived. Nero turned around in frustration with his fist covered in flames. He screamed Anacrosha and shot a huge fire arrow that destroyed the entire dummy. He was asked why he was hiding his full potential, and he said that he can't stand out because otherwise he will be disposed of by the nobles, and he started to cry. The teacher asked him if feared the nobles, but he shook his head. He whispered to him not to fall for his temptation, otherwise he would unleash the thing inside him. The professors called the students the next day and told them that they will be going through 7 exams during their time in the academy. Their first test will be the test of strength, and they will be taking it in 3 days. He explains to them that there will be monsters in this trail, and they will need to fight them off if they want to reach their goal. The teacher tells them that they are able to revive them in case they die. Also, if they find their group mate on the wooden bridge that is at the end of the trail, they need to defeat him, because only 3 people will qualify out of the 5 members of each group. Nero wakes up as he hears someone crying. It's Neria. He asks her why she was crying. It turns out that his shoes were torn apart. Nero was stunned. It turns out that Haken took them that morning for his excuse of a morning jog to destroy them. Nero asked her if she wasn't going to go, and she said that she would be coming after him. Nero decided to go and do the test without shoes. Neria went to the teacher and asked her for new shoes, but she was told that the person who had the keys to the storage house was away and will be back in the summer. She had another idea to fix the shoes. The students were told about the rules when they went to the place where the trail was held. The teacher singles for them and they bolt. This test was especially hard on Nero because he had no shoes and the place was rough. As he was going, he came across 2 monsters who attacked him, but he blocked them. He then finishes them off with his magic. Meanwhile, Neria came to the trail. She was out of breath, but she made it in time. Nero had just finished dealing with the 2 monsters when he heard someone calling out to him. It turns out it was Neria. She had brought him his shoes and they were fixed. The sweet little girl made them from her own shoes and was left with no shoes. Her legs were even bleeding. She smiled while crying and told him that she wasn't even qualified in the first place, so she was giving her chance to Nero. Nero puts on the shoes and sprints. He had a plan to help Neria and have her pass the exam as well. The other two kids were also busy with the exam, and they were fighting off the monsters. Haken screams at one of the professors that were observing him that his arms were broken, but he did not care as they were gonna heal him later. He meets up with Jacken after they both have almost died. They thought Even had crossed the bridge, but he did not. They assumed that Nero has failed, but then they see him sprint over to the bridge. He gets onto the bridge and turns around to face them. Jacken approaches Nero and tells him to move. He tells him to go home and clean some cow poop. Nero doesn't budge and Jacken starts to scream at him. Nero stabs him in his shoulder and throws him off the bridge easily. The teacher takes it from there and Jacken fails the test. Haken asks him how dare he do that to his friend. He rushes at him and swings his sword, but Nero destroys it easily with one swing. Haken didn't expect Nero to be strong enough to break his sword. He throws it away and calls it cheap. He decided to use magic because he remembers that Nero didn't know magic really well. But to his surprise, Nero unleashed a huge spell that covered the whole place. He didn't even chant the spell. Haken falls down the bridge too, and that's how he was disqualified. Nero tells Evan to come at him too. Evan uses a teleportation spell to come at him from above, but Nero blocks it. He uses another spell to throw him off the bridge, but Nero grabs onto the bridge before he falls down. Evan tells him that this is the end and that he will never be on his level because he is a slave. He shoots at Nero and that's it. But wait, Evan is now in shock. Nero had endured the spell and his necklace was showing. He shoots a fire arrow at Evan so that he clears some space. He takes his chance and jumps really high and kicks Evan, making him lose his sword. Evan loses his balance and he is now in the same situation that Nero was in before. Nero, rather than taking this chance, he helps Evan despite everything he had done to him. Meanwhile, Neria was left behind. She was crying a lot because she didn't meet her dad's expectations, but then she got approached by Nero. He tells her not to cry anymore because he has defeated Jacken and Haken, meaning there is still a spot for her. Neria smiles through her tears and thanks him,